David Davis, thank you so much for joining me. I want to kick off by asking you to just give us an overview in your mind of where we are in the Tory leadership race.
Oh, wow. Well, we are just a day or so short, they're too short, of the second round, which will reduce them from 5 to 4. And at this point in time, there will be all sorts of manoeuvring going on to try to get the people they think are their strongest opponents out. So that's what tends to happen. So the lending of votes from one group to another, and so on, and quite a struggle for votes. And the truth is, they're all pretty even to each other. I mean, anybody who takes a bet on who goes out on Wednesday has a high appetite for risk, because it's very, very hard to predict. My hunch is that both Kevin Badenoch, and Jenrick will both still be in. The rest I couldn't guess.
Who are you backing? What horse are you backing?
I'm not. I mean, I've been talking to all of them. I did originally vote for Priti Patel before she went out, because I thought she was at risk of going out and I wanted to try and keep her in. That wouldn't necessarily have been my final vote, but it was just to sort of keep them, in my view, the main players in, and I still haven't decided. Indeed, I'm speaking to one of them tomorrow, literally, for them to try and persuade me. I have issues with all of them because, let me take one example for you. A number of them are saying, right, we want to pull out of the European Court of Human Rights, right? That's an absolute no-no for me, because I don't trust governments.
You're part of government.
I know. Well, I'm now an opponent to our government at the moment, but I don't trust governments. Governments are very untrustworthy with unfettered power, and although I think the ECHR is a nightmare of an organisation, does all sorts of things it shouldn't do, it is there at the end of the day to protect the individual. That's what the original convention.
If governments are a nightmare in terms of power, is that what happened to the Tory Party? Because many would say they're in a death spiral.
Oh, they're not. They're not in a death spiral. We've been here before. I've been around since Gladstone, right? So I've seen a few other supposed death spirals, and that's not the case. But there's no doubt that the last Conservative government lost its way, arguably forgot what conservatism was for, and the leaders are not entirely blameworthy in that. They are partly blameworthy, certainly. But things like the COVID crisis sort of broke the back of the normal approach to government, and landed us with £500 billion of deficit, which we've now somehow got to pay off in the next. So it's like a war debt. So it sort of broke the back of things. So yeah, they lost their way, but they're not in a death spiral. They'll be back.
Have we a bit of a weak bench in this leadership race?
Well, it's not Margaret Thatcher versus Ted Heath. Let's put it that way. One of the difficulties is none of them's because, bluntly, in modern politics we have a bit of a cult of youth. The average age of this leadership bench, as you put it, is probably 10 years less than would have been the case in most previous circumstances. In Margaret Thatcher's government, most of the people standing for leader now would probably have been a minister of state at best. So I don't think in innate talent, but in experience, they are a weak bench.
Yeah. Speaking from experience, when you look at what's happening right now in the world today, we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, the fact that there's a presidential election happening in the United States that has put virtually everything else on hold. What's your greatest concern?
Well, my greatest concern is the confluence of events, right? I do not remember a time like this in the number of combined challenges to government, both internationally and nationally, since 1975. I picked 1975 because that's the year the Tory Party chose Margaret Thatcher as its new leader, right? And we all at the time, I was one of her supporters, we all at the time weren't sure we got it right, right? Why? Because then we had inflation, high on inflation, unemployment, oil shocks. We had a dominant Soviet Union, a growing China, us in decline, withdrawal from empire, failures of public services at home, couldn't balance the books, foreign
cornucopia of challenges.
A cornucopia of challenges. And we got the same today. You've got the first war in Europe since the Second World War. You've got the Middle East in some of the most complex, problematic positions, whether it's Gaza or the Yemen, having huge impacts and impacts on world trade because of the challenges there. You've got a dominant China, an unstable Russia, and at home you've got a National Health Service which we've been unable to deliver proper outcomes from. You've got problems in all other areas of public service, an incredible problem balancing the books. And you talk about death spirals. The spiral we've got at the moment is a possible taxes go up, growth goes down. Taxes go up more, growth goes down more. That's a spiral that I fear, not a political death spiral, an economic spiral.
Yeah. If Margaret Thatcher was with us today, what do you think she'd think of her party?
She'd be telling them off and telling them to buck up, I say. Buck your ideas up, boys. Yeah.
When you think about, as you say, the financial issues that are facing this government, essentially, they're a government seeking tremendous reform. How difficult do you think that is going to be for the Tories going forward? Because essentially, Keir Starmer is standing for a heck of a lot that you guys don't.
Well, he's talking a big story on reform, but I can't actually see how the talk is addressing the big subjects. Take the health service. Lots and lots of stories about reform, but what are they going to do? I mean, they've already paid off a vast sum of money to the junior doctors. They appeared not to have got any productivity outcome from that at all, and this is true actually across the board. Every single wage settlement they've made, and they are beginning to be quite inflationary, every single wage settlement they've made has come without any productivity deal, in truth, not a real one anyway. So I'm not sure that that they're really talking that. Also, in economic terms, they still think Gordon Brown was a good chancellor. And so what they're trying to do is copy Gordon Brown, right down to we've just read the books. The books are always open. In every Western democracy, you can read the books, whoever you are. That was a Gordon Brown trick. If you look in detail at what Rachel Reeves has done in terms of her planning, she made a thing called the Mays Lecture, which is a very big, high prestige lecture the Chancellor makes. And in her Mays Lecture, she basically said, we're going to do the off-balance sheet financing that Gordon Brown did, things like PFIs. I'm not sure whether your audience would know that, private finance initiatives, right? Mm-hmm. To give you a measure of how that worked, in Gordon Brown's day, to get 50 billion of assets, we ended up paying the private sector 275 billion. Bankers made a lot of money out of it, but we didn't get much out of it. So I don't see a big reforming government. What I see is a big talking government, and one that makes quite a few mistakes already.
Yeah. Speaking of the bankers, speaking of finance, I mean, so many folks that I have spoken to have said they are considering leaving the United Kingdom. There are worries about capital flight. What is the risk, in your mind, to the economy?
Well, that's a really serious risk. I mean, you've got already, and it's partly the old government's fault. This bit is partly the old, well, actually a whole series of governments, right back to Blair and including Blair. We have got an over-regulated city now, if we talk banking and finance, and as a result, already we've lost some trade, the LIBOR trade, the interbank borrowing trade has gone to New York, for example. But there's lots of others too. And loads of people are talking about leaving now. I mean, given that in some of these businesses, whether it's banking or tech, or even not the electronic tech, but even the sort of pharmaceutical areas and things like that, you can work from anywhere in the world now.
And they've just seemingly made it much harder to do work in this country.
They made it hard to do work. We have
and somehow shameful to make money.
I don't think they're quite there. I mean, back during the Blair days, and by the way, never underestimate the extent to which not so much Blair himself, but the Blair camp has influence with this government. Huge influence. You know,
we heard him speaking just a few days ago and blaming the migration crisis on the Tories.
Yeah, as usual. But he
does have a point, does he not? On the migration crisis being
well,
at least partially the fault of the former government.
The migration crisis, we tend to be rather blinkered about this. If you look around Europe, every single country in Europe, there's not one that doesn't have a migration crisis, and most of them are bigger than ours, right? Ours is rather visible because of the boats crossing the channel, the illegal migration issue.
So you're saying we've got one, but it just ain't that big by comparison?
No. I'm saying it's big, but I'm saying no government in Europe has managed to get a grip of it. Not one. Doesn't matter whether they're left, right, centre, new, old, none of them have got a grip of it. Now, I was not a particular fan of the Rwanda policy, you know, but at the end of the day I thought, well, we haven't got anything else to deter these people. Yeah. And I think one of the great mistakes Rishi Sunak made by going so early was he didn't give the Rwanda policy a chance to happen. Because and this is an oblique answer to your question, had they actually carried out the Rwanda policy and got some flights out there, the next thing would have happened is the rest of Europe would have copied us, right, left and centre. As it is, now we've abandoned it, Germany's taken it over. But if we'd actually carried it on with it, the Germans, the French, the Austrians already, even the European Union would be talking about third country policies. That's what it is. It's anybody comes here who doesn't have a right to be here, they get sent to a third country they didn't want to go to, you know. And what we didn't do was finish that job. We didn't finish the delivery of the Rwanda job. So that was the primary public failure. The other one was a decision to allow basically 1 million people to come here legally. And I think that was driven by the Treasury. And it would be very interesting because again, it goes back to Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown and Blair discovered, you know, if we want to keep talking about having a terrific growth record, if we bring millions of people to the country, that pushes the growth up by itself. It's an artificial way of doing it, but nobody sees it and it makes us look good. And I think we're going to see the same again here, actually. Otherwise, their growth number is going to be terrible. So let's see. I'll come back in a year and we'll talk about how this government's done with this, but I suspect it's going to prove harder than they think.
How have you seen Keir Starmer's recent travels? Because he seems to have been scurrying to every European capital, trying to make new friends and get some agreements.
Well, I don't blame him for that. Look, if you're a new government and you've come in after whatever it is, 18 years of your previous, or 14 years of your previous government, you want to make the most of it. You're a new kid on the block. A lot of other countries will be willing to big you up. It's an easy photo opportunity. And there undoubtedly will have been countries sitting back and waiting, not doing deals on this, that and the other with the outgoing government, precisely because it was seen as an outgoing government. Yeah. Why would you do that? You'd wait until the new one comes in. And so he'll go and make the most of it. Frankly, I can't blame him for that. Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of things I can blame him for, but not that.
Undermining Brexit in some way.
No, not immediately. I mean, let me differentiate. I think there's a perfectly good argument for trying to warm up the relationship with some of our European colleagues. They have all got big problems of their own. Germany's economic problems and their immigration problems are off the scale. France has got a divided nation, basically, in terms of its parliament. So they've all got things that they want to resolve. Now, trying to warm up relations, that's fine. That's good diplomacy. But I think in some senses Starmer may be naive if he thinks he's going to get something for nothing. Because what you can guarantee is they're going to have a shopping list. And the shopping list will be fishing rights in the North Sea, or it'll be the rights of young Europeans, by which we mean up to 30-year-olds, we're not talking adolescents here, right to come here for 4 years and so on. So you may get some backdoor things which do undermine Brexit, but so that comes out of naivety really on their part. I don't think it's his intention, but I think he may end up doing some of that by accident.
You mentioned Tony Blair. What's the danger in the senior doyen of the Labour Party having influence today?
Well, the part of the danger is what I've already mentioned, which is that the economic strategy of the Blair government was one that relied hugely on luck. You know, they were given a very, very good economy when they took over. They themselves said that, not publicly particularly, but privately. And then it ran out with the 2008 crash. And then everything fell to bits, and the poor financial structure of the government suddenly became apparent. If the current Labour government continues to believe that Blair and Brown were good at economics, they'll make the same mistakes: off-balance sheet accounting, poor control of costs, and poor management of growth, because they don't have such a lucky backdrop. The world at large is more problematic. America's going, well, it's we don't know where America's going to go, but it's already got probably the biggest piece of protectionist legislation in modern times in the Inflation Reduction Act, you know. And you're seeing things like that all around the world. Europe is doing things like putting carbon tariffs on everybody, not just on us, on everybody. All these disruptive impacts on world trade is going to come right back into our own account, and it's going to hit our growth rates. So it's going to be harder for them. So if they just swallow, well, what happened last time, it won't work.
Yeah. Who is better for the United Kingdom, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
If I were an American, I'd probably vote for Harris. Almost for stability reasons, right? Not because I think one policy or the other is better.
Well, but the Biden administration hasn't really delivered on stability.
You know, I mean, I'm thinking economic stability, but
some would argue not even that.
Yeah, not even that. I know, but in comparative terms, Trump is very unpredictable. Now there are some virtues in that. I mean, there's some virtues in having an unpredictable leader, because it means people won't take chances. I mean, I always say.
I mean, do you honestly think Vladimir Putin would have invaded Ukraine had Donald Trump been in office?
Well, that's the question, you see, and I think there is a virtue in that. You see, I mean, I think take one of America's most best regarded presidents of modern times, Obama. Right? Obama was a calculator. You know, that's the nature of the man. He was an intellectual, sort of a lawyer, of course, but you know, he calculated out everything. And the trouble with being a calculator is the other side can calculate too, you know. And so, you know, he makes his chess move and Putin makes his chess move, and he knows how far he can go. With someone like Trump, he's liable just to tip the chessboard up, you know, and you saw a little bit of that in his reaction to some of the Middle Eastern issues with missile attacks and so on. But you know, that's a lot to gamble on. Yeah, there's a lot to gamble on. So, you know, it wouldn't be an easy choice for me, but that's the way I go. You asked in terms of Britain. For us, the most important element of the relationship is NATO. You know, by a country mile. You know, whatever happens on economics will be marginal. What happens on defence will be enormous. And NATO has never been more important and never actually been weaker. You know, those two things together are terrifying. Now, it's turning around, but it's taking forever. You know, people.
Some would argue, though, that President Trump, while in office, actually galvanized a re-strengthening of that alliance, simply because he said, you guys have got to get off your rear end.
Funnily enough, I had this conversation with Nigel Farage, who's obviously close to Trump. And I said to him, when you talk to him, tell him, you know, a lot of us agree with him, you know, kicking 7 bells out of the Germans and others for not spending enough on defence. I said, but if that's read as abandoning NATO or threatening to abandon NATO, that has the opposite impact.
Yeah.
It has, it will say to Putin, actually, I don't care that much about this lot, this bunch of, what's the right word? There were people free riders,
Yeah.
and that's the dangerous line. And I've not heard anything for him saying, NATO is massively important. Every other president since the formation of NATO, just after the Second World War, has been very clear. And it's the old thing. If you want peace, prepare for war.
Yeah.
And what we have done is spent the peace dividend. Even the phrase "the peace dividend," it's actually like cutting back on the house insurance because you don't think it's going to burn down. Terrible. So that's the worry. So as you can tell by my agonised answer here, it's quite a difficult call.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if suddenly Trump turned around and said, actually, whatever I do, I will stand up for our allies. That might alter my view, but at the moment,
Wouldn't hold your breath.
It's not there.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about more broadly Europe, because obviously the NATO conversation has started other conversations about European collective defense. Who is the leader of Europe? We used to talk about Germany with their economic issues and lack of leadership. We're now talking about France. Michel Barnier as the new Prime Minister of France. Good for Europe, good for UK relations?
Well, good for France, I think. Let me just deal with a slightly wider question for 30 seconds. Europe is in a bigger mess than I can remember in my adult life. Economically, it's all over the shop. I mean, people whinge on about the consequence of Brexit. We're lucky not to be in there at the moment, to be honest, because all of them are doing badly. Pretty much all of them are doing badly. And partly it's over-regulation, partly it's just
the energy question.
Energy and circumstance, as well. And of course their dependence on Russia, you name it. So all of those things are problematic, and they don't have answers. And the second order consequence of that is massive division. You've got Germany. We designed the German constitution to prevent the rise of far right-wing parties.
And they're back.
And they're back, It was literally the Brits and the French to some extent sat down and constructed that constitution for that reason. And it's failed. And it's partly because of all the other challenges. So it's a really, really grim, difficult backdrop. Now, Michel, dear old Michel, I actually think Michel's going to be good for France. He was, at one point he wanted to run for president, decided he couldn't get the support. But nevertheless, I think he's good for France for a variety of reasons. Firstly, I think the current, the new French Prime Minister, Michel as it is, biggest job is going to be managing the division in their own parliament. It's really tough, And Michel's got a sufficiently strong political base that he can reach out beyond. Basically, he's a Gaullist, right?
Yes.
He can reach out. I mean, literally a Gaullist. He's an admirer of President de Gaulle, and he can reach out across the divide in a way I think Macron can't. Partly because Macron is the ultimate énarque, the ultimate product of the École Nationale, like so much of, excuse me, like so much of the French establishment.
And that generation.
Yeah, political, diplomatic, civil service, and corporate, the lot. They're all énarques, right? And part of this split across Europe, and indeed the vote in the last election here, is a reaction to the sort of the elite not solving the problems that the ordinary people care about. That's why immigration is such a powerful argument. Now, that's not what that's not where he came from. I don't know if you know about his background. He started out as the mayor of Val d'Isère during the great French ski Olympics, Winter Olympics. He's one of Jean-Claude Killy's best friends. For your audience, probably a lot younger than me, one of the great downhill skiers of all time. There are fantastic pictures of him flying, apparently completely out of control, winning the gold medals. And so he came up the local government route. you know, and he's not a Nicole. He's not the sort of elitist.
He wasn't a corporate lawyer.
Not a corporate lawyer. He's not the elitist, and he's been in public service for a very long time. You know, I first met him when I was Europe minister back in 1994. I mean, that's how far back this goes. And he was. I mean, he wasn't a genius, but he was good, capable.
That's your friend you're talking about.
Yeah. But you know, he is. But he's good, capable, reliable. You knew where he came from. He wouldn't always be on your side either, you know. But very often with me. But you know, a sort of man. You know, you think in a fight, I want him on my side.
So not a genius, but good for France.
Yeah. You don't have to be. Listen, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to be a senior politician. Look around the world, you know. And the other thing to bear in mind as well, and I think people don't see this sometimes, is that in France the Prime Minister is very much second string. You know, I saw this really dramatically once, and I went to a conference in France in Tours, I think it was, and Mitterrand was the president, and we were talking to the then Prime Minister, and Mitterrand turns up, and it's like the king has arrived, you know, red carpet, brass band, military, everything, you know, and the whole place was locked down as well. And then we had a press conference, and he chaired the press conference and told the Prime Minister what, you know, when he could talk, basically. So the relationship is quite a dominant one. Well, not quite, a very dominant one between the President and the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister's got to do the practical stuff, and I think Michel will be very good at that indeed.
Yeah. Walk me through the current situation surrounding Lucy Letby. For you, this is a case that smells.
Yeah, I mean, when the Letby case first happened, like most of the country, I thought, well, if she did that, she deserved to go to prison and they throw away the key, you know. And that's what I thought up until about 3.5 months ago. And I was sitting in my room waiting for a telephone call from a guy called Mike Lynch, who had just been fighting a case in California and just won it. And so I was waiting for an American telephone call, and up comes an American number, and I pick up my phone, and it's not him, it's somebody in New York, one of the previous Prime Minister's science advisors. And he said, have you seen the New Yorker? Well, I have to say, the New Yorker's not my normal reading, not sitting in London. And I said, no. And he said, well, there's a 13,000-word article about the Letby trial. I try and get hold of it. Can't get it. It's blocked online by court order. Yeah. I managed to get a copy. I read it. It's really quite persuasive. There are a lot of problems in this, right? So I raised in Parliament the next day, why can't we get a copy of this so we can actually, everybody read it? We believe in open justice, don't we? And after that, I got calls from past presidents of the Royal Statistical Society, past presidents of the Royal Paediatric, and
people were coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah, but not just. I mean, you often, in my position, you often get a whole load of conspiracy theories come out. If I got up and I don't know, talked about vaccines or something, I'd get thousands of people email me. This wasn't that. These were people who were at the top of the profession, the relevant professions: neonatologists, statisticians, medical forensic scientists, criminal forensic scientists, and people who had worked at that hospital before. So this great influx. And what it makes me worry, I mean, basically it makes me worried that the fundamental bits of the case, I haven't been able to read every single word of the case because I can't get, the transcript's not available, but I've read vast amounts of reporting, literally files and files and files about it. And I'm worried. And I think they need to have a proper appeal, basically, a proper full appeal and retrial, really. I don't know that Lucy Letby's innocent, but I don't believe she's been proven guilty. That's where I'm at on this, and it's incredibly controversial and sensitive. I mean, you can imagine how the parents of the dead children feel. They're really upset by people even suggesting this lady might be innocent. But if she is innocent, then you've got to wonder what the other causes are. what do we know? Well, there's very, very little firm evidence. There's loads and loads of circumstantial evidence, no firm evidence. But the one firm thing we know is the number of children who died in this hospital jumped from 2 or 3 to 15 to 17. That sort of number. There are different depending on the dates, which was an astonishing increase. Now, was that a statistical artifact? Some professors of stats have said yes, it probably is. Was it the murder, which is what the outcome of the trial was? Was it the failure of the whole medical system, the doctors, not enough trained nurses, not enough trained doctors, not enough resources?
Because given the state of the health system in this country, that could all be in fact true.
And in fact, there's a report saying exactly that about this hospital that came out before the trial, but wasn't shown to the trial. One of the things I worry about, they didn't see this. There's a report from a doctor who looked at all the deaths and said there were natural causes.
Who's at fault there? Is it her lawyer's not good enough? And what was?
I can't tell. But what I do know is that from my point of view, you know, if the trial had been done with those included, I'd be less worried about it. And then finally, it might be something else. It might be an external cause like a superbug. You know, we know there's a drug called Pseudomonas in the water there. That can kill. You know, we're talking, just for your audience, these are neonates. They're sort of 30 weeks, 25 weeks gestation in some cases. You know, they're this big. They're sort of a couple of pounds. 800 grams is the sort of lowest weight that they.
Very vulnerable.
Very, very, very. And they don't really, at that period in their development, they don't really have an immune system, because otherwise you'd kill the mother, because they're normally still in gestation. So you got that. So you got that Pseudomonas, and you probably got others because they've got terrible plumbing problems. Again, old hospital, leaky plumbing, sewage backing up. Now, it just seems to me that these children may have died because of failures of the system.
Yeah.
You know, and if that's the case, then the Lucy Letby trial is not just a miscarriage, which it would be in those circumstances, but we've got real problems with the health service which are being hidden behind the trial, and that's a real problem, because it isn't just this hospital. If you look around the country in neonatal units, you see spikes everywhere. You know, from time to time. We've got a rash of serial murders, or have we got a more systematic failing in our health service?
Do you believe this government should raise an inquiry here in a very serious way? Because, as you say, it extends beyond just this woman.
No, I don't think so. Not in that sense. I think the proper answer to this is a thing in Britain called the CCRC, the Criminal Case Review Commission, right? I don't believe, even when I think something's gone wrong, I don't believe government should meddle in the law. I've seen it being done before, and it's not a nice thing to see. And governments, America, Britain, all the countries that are like us, rely on the rule of law. And the rule of law can't be the rule of law subject to the government meddling. All right, that's so no is the answer. What I think should happen is it should go back to the CCRC, and they should look at it properly and ideally decide on a new appeal, proper appeal, in which case we can test all these things. Now there's a Thirlwell inquiry going on. There's an inquiry starting tomorrow on what we can learn from it, and what I hope the Thirlwell inquiry will do is not just say, oh right, she's guilty, so how can we detect murderers in future? But say, this is a more general problem, because remember, she's charged with 7 murders, but 15 or more children died. You know, so what about the other 8? You know,
Yeah.
and this is, I mean, in a way, it's bigger than a miscarriage. You know, because the ideal outcome of a report like this is to prevent it happening again.
Yeah.
You know. And, you know, we're talking probably hundreds of babies' lives, you know, really, really, really important.
Yeah. You mentioned conspiracy theories. I have to ask you about the death of Mike Lynch, and also, just days earlier, the death of his business partner. Foul play at work?
I don't think so. I mean, I'll wait and see what the inquiries say, right? But I don't think so. I mean, you're quite right. It is the most extraordinary odds. I mean, it's millions to one, probably many, many millions to one against two co-defendants, both of whom succeed in the same trial in a big, big corporate battle for hundreds, well, actually billions of dollars or pounds at stake, for them to die within 2 days is very, very, very long. If it were, I tell you what, if the opponent was a Russian corporation, I'd be taking personal measures.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think so. But I will read the Italian. The Italians will do a good job. This is one area where the continental approach of inquisitorial justice rather than adversarial justice,
Yes.
we're both used to adversarial justice in Britain and America. I think inquisitorial approach to what happened, who did what when, what doors were left open and so on, will be much more effective at getting the truth. And when that comes out, I'll read it carefully and review the answer to your question. But at the moment, no, I'm not assuming it's anything other than an incredibly long shot. After all, long shots happen all the time. I sometimes say to people, winning the lottery is a long shot, but somebody always does, So this is the case. This is very personal to me. I had lunch with Mike after he'd won the case in America. He came and he rang me up. It was the early part of the election, and he said, "Shall we have a boozy lunch?" So we went at a
celebratory lunch.
A celebratory lunch at Wilton's in London, and we had a long, very, very good lunch, very nice lunch, and we talked about Letby. Actually, we talked about. I said, "So what are you going to do next?" And he said, "Well, I want to be able to answer what he calls the St. Peter question." What do you mean by that? He said, "Well, when I knock on the pearly gates, and St. Peter says, 'What have you done with your life?' I want to be able to give a good answer, So I'm going to first work to get this treaty with the Americans, this extradition treaty, which had led to him being tried in California, and basically incarcerated in California for a year and then tried. I'm going to get that fixed. Then I'm going to set up an innocence project. There is one in the States, I think, which is designed to help people for which there have been miscarriages of justice. He said, I think I'm going to start with this Lucy Letby trial. Now, he'd been in California and I'd been here, so he didn't know I was taking an interest.
Yes.
So just from his own instincts, because he was a fabulous statistician, he made himself pretty much a billionaire on being the best statistical analyst in the world and being able to turn that into software. He said, I think I want to do that. And then he said, but meanwhile, I'm going to go and have a holiday. And laughingly, he said, "Yeah, you don't fancy a trip to the Mediterranean, do you?" And I said, "No, I've got an election to fight." But I think to myself sometimes, what if I'd taken the invite, But it wasn't really an invite, it was just threw out the line. But so quite something. But no, I don't. I think there are lots of things to say about Mike Lynch's final few years, but I don't think murder enters into it. I don't think so.
There's just been a report out that HP is looking to recoup their legal fees. In your mind, is this something that should be allowed to happen?
No. Firstly, I think they, not just their legal fees, they want to basically take his whole fortune.
From his widow.
From his widow. Firstly, in the sort of lexicon of tastelessness, while his widow's still recovering in hospital in Italy, to come out with that, I think really says something about Hewlett Packard. I've got very, very little time for the Hewlett Packard management. Secondly, I think they're wrong, and I thought that they won a civil case in Britain on this, right? But I thought the judge made the wrong call. I read it very, very carefully. I've studied at London Business School and Harvard Business School. I can read a balance sheet, and my view on it was the judge here got it wrong. The jury, ironically, in California on 15 counts, unanimously found in favour of Mike and against Hewlett Packard. In effect, both him and his colleague. And I think we need to come back and appeal the British case and play out the same argument that we played in California. And I think the appeal court will find against Hewlett Packard. And I hope they'll award spectacular costs against them, just as a lesson in manners, frankly.
In your mind, if evidence does stand up that there were major faults on the part of the captain, on the part of the crew, would you support a criminal prosecution?
Yes, I would if it's culpable, which sounds like a sidestep. Look, one of the stark outcomes there was that most of the crew, nearly all the crew survived, nearly all the passengers died. Right? Now, the first responsibility of a captain or the watch, the
Is
people
to
on
explain
watch,
where the exits are.
is to look after the safety of everybody on board, and in particular those who probably know least, who will be the guests. Now, if what is shown is culpable negligence, then or culpable action, leaving hatches open, not making sure that people knew early enough that there was a risk, then yes, criminal charges will be appropriate, and I would expect the Italians would bring them, and that is why I think that they're quizzing everybody under sort of a criminal remit, really, at the moment. So that's the right thing to do, but it's culpable. It's not, a single accident doesn't do it. It's culpable negligence or culpable action that's the issue here. But there we are.
David, final question. What are the perks of being in the opposition? Are there any?
No.
None whatsoever?
No.
You have more time to focus on your areas of particular interest?
Look, I mean, I'm an unusual MP and I've been in opposition before. I quite enjoy opposition. I would never seek to be in opposition because what we're trying to do is run the country, so we want to be in government. But opposition is a different set of challenges, and it's a lot of quite high-profile conflicts and arguments, and you are very much more on your own wits in opposition. So in government, you're fed your speeches, they tell you when you're going to appear in the Commons, they do all the rules checking for you. You've got basically legions of people working for you. Legions of clever people for the most part. In opposition, when I was in opposition last time, I removed 3 government ministers in short order, one after another, 2 Home Secretaries and 1 Minister of State. That took probably about as much work as I put into earning my first degree, in terms of, and my own work, all the research, all the study, all the analysis. And on the days before we actually got rid of 2 of those ministers, I and my team were up all night, working it through, when we were challenging the government over the death of Jean-Charles de Menezes, as somebody got shot after our 7/7 crisis, wrongly. They've got the wrong person, the state murdered an innocent person. We had to do the work on that, and it was vast amounts of work. But that being said, it is formidably satisfying. If you can hold a government to account, if you can make them change their behaviour and make sure that in future they don't shoot innocent people, or change their behaviour so that, for example, I mean, the first time Tony Blair was defeated in government was by me on a thing called 90 days detention without charge. The idea the state can lock people up for 3 months without even telling them why they're locked up. And I beat him on that. That's an important piece of British history which was done from opposition. So I enjoy myself. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but most of my colleagues who don't even know that's coming.
Is there a danger in your mind that the Labour government, as is now, could knock the Britishness out of being Britain? And I ask that because, very much like in the United States, there are 2 parties, schools of thought that are fundamentally opposed at this point. And when I speak to those who have been, like yourself, in the previous governments for a long time now, there are fundamental worries about a change to British society. And we see that in the riots that we saw recently. There's a lot of conflict there. Is it a class warfare issue? In your mind, how dangerous is this government, potentially?
I don't think governments can, in the short term, alter the character of nations. They can change the institutions, which in turn do that. But I think the riots you're talking about and the reactions you're talking about, they're a little bit like the Brexit referendum. They are people reacting to a class that they feel has ignored their interests or is contemptuous of them or whatever. Now that, the rioters were wrong. Let's be plain about that. There's no two ways about it. They were breaking the law. They deserve to be punished. But that sort of reaction comes out of that sort of problem. So I don't think they'll change the character of Britain. What I have to watch, and one of my jobs really, is that they don't change the institutions. I mean, Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, all have histories built on an institutional structure which nobody designed. It sort of came together, and broadly speaking, it's why we've been successful as nations. I think why most of what we do is admirable. Not everything, but most of what we do is admirable. And that's down to the institutional structures, not to virtuous politicians one way or another. It's because the rule of law, the action of democracy, free speech, all are fundamental to what makes us what we are, much more than our DNA or whatever. And that's what we have to protect. And if we protect that, then the character of the nation will go where it wants to go, and it'll generally pick a good place to be. That's it.
So it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.